Hello, it's John Heaton. Today I'm going to talk about a little bit what it's been like to have been a Beatles fan for the last 38 years. But before I start, a couple of things. I want to mention a superb site called Fab4 Free for All, where they do reviews of audio podcasts of solo albums and stuff, and it's very amusing. Three American guys, and they really know their stuff, and thoroughly recommend that. I've listened to 5 or 6 of them already. And then before I start, I don't think I've told this story on my channel, so I want to talk about the time when I was lucky enough to briefly meet George Harrison in 1987. So the background was there was a Dylan concert at Wembley, and I went to see him on, I think it was the Friday night, and then the following night my sister had tickets to the same concert on the Saturday. So I drove her up to Wembley, and then I didn't have a ticket for that night, so I went to the back entrance, the artist entrance, in the hope of meeting Dylan, who I'd never met, and to this day I've never met. Anyway, I was hanging by around that entrance, and about maybe 4 or 5 of us there for the same reason. And then this small car pulled up in the car park, and I think it was a very unpretentious car, maybe a Mini or a Ford Fiesta or something. 2 guys got out and walked towards the gate, and first person I recognised was Jeff Lynne, his very distinctive hairstyle and glasses. That's Jeff Lynne. And then I looked at the guy he was walking with, and much to my delight, realised it was George Harrison. So they were walking very purposefully towards the entrance. They obviously were not going to stop. So as George walked past and through the gate, I said, like your new single, George, because that's when Got My Mind Set on You had just been released. And he said, thanks. And then I said, I'm glad you've released Lay His Head on the B-side. That's an excellent track. And he looked back at me and said, yeah, that was to save using up some of the new ones. And that was it. And I could see Jeff Lynne looking back at me, grinning, obviously acknowledging that I was quite a knowledgeable fan, mentioning such an obscure track as that. That was it. So I didn't even get to talk to Jeff Lynne and tell him how much I loved ELO, but when you've got 3 or 4 seconds to talk to either George Harrison or Jeff Lynne, I guess you're going to choose George. So I was very lucky, and then George went on stage with Dylan that night and sang a guest vocal for one of the verses of Rainy Day Woman. And of course the following year, George and Jeff would join Bob and form the Travelling Wilburys. So that was, I guess I can't place the date exactly, but November, December 87, around that time. So, back to the subject of this video. So I've been a Beatles fan since 1978, so it's getting on for 38 years, almost exactly, I think, because I got into them round about the time of London Town coming out, which is about 38 years ago. And obviously one of the questions which comes up is, do you have a favourite Beatle? And I never really have had a favourite Beatle. It really depends on my mood. Those of you who know me will know I'm just as likely to put a Ringo album on, like Bo Coops of Blues or Rotograveur. You know, if I need cheering up, Ringo is the happy-go-lucky solo Beatle I go to, and it more or less always does the trick. And if I'm in a mood for some uplifting music, I'll listen to Paul's stuff, because most of his stuff is uplifting. And if I'm in a John mood, I mean, it really depends, you know. If I want to hear some guitar stuff and some majestic songs, maybe turn to George Harrison. I think right now I'm in a bit of a Ringo phase, so never really had a favourite Beatle. Maybe personality-wise, slight preference for John Lennon, but not much in it. And I think George, as a songwriter from the White Album onwards, was on a par with the other two, and his solo work has got just as many gems in it as John and Paul's or Ringo's. So obviously one does have slight negatives on all four of them really. Can't love everything they've ever done. For example, John Lennon, his avant-garde stuff with Yoko, the early stuff, Life with the Lions and Wedding Album, Two Virgins, don't have any time for that, don't really understand it. And obviously Paul's film Give My Regards to Broad Street is not great, and I didn't much like his collaboration with Michael Jackson. And then when it comes to George, I've always found him a little bit anti-Beatles and anti-McCartney. I think I can count on one hand the amount of nice things he said about Paul over the years. It's a bit of a shame. And then he tends to be a little bit preachy in his lyrics and, you know, holier than thou, and he doesn't always live up to his example or lead by example. So minor grumbles on all four of them, but 90% of the time, I mean, I love all four of them, love them. It's a bit like family, actually. One tends to be hypercritical of one's close family, and if you know them so well, but you find if outsiders start attacking them, then you'll leap to their defense. Like, for example, if Led Zeppelin comes up to me and says the White Album is crap or something, I will take issue and defend it. So, and then I've never really understood this thing about Rolling Stones' rivalry with Beatles, and one has to be either a Rolling Stones fan or a Beatles fan. And I think that was the case in the late 60s and early 70s. There was kind of a bit of a fashion element or trendy or, you know, who the in crowd was with. And personally, I've never had a problem enjoying the Stones music and the Beatles music and, you know, the other great groups, you know, some of Led Zeppelin and a lot of Pink Floyd. And I don't find them mutually exclusive. I think it's possible to take the pieces from all these groups and enjoy them together. So I've never really understood that. There is a temptation when one knows the Beatles so well, or when one thinks one knows the Beatles so well, to think that one is on intimate terms with them and knows them inside out and can actually judge them. And obviously that was taken to an extreme by so-called Fan in December 1980 with John, and then later on in December 99 with George. So one has to be careful not to get carried away with one's fanaticism, and obviously those are very extreme examples, and most of us are nothing like that. A less extreme example would be the author Geoffrey Gilliano, who's written some good books on the Beatles, but he got a bit carried away in one interview and started slagging off Paul and called him shallow and vacuous, and slagging off George as well. I think he concluded that none of the Beatles are nice people as personalities. And soon after he said this, George's wife Olivia wrote a letter to The Guardian, and it was published, and I'm now going to read it for you. The sight of Geoffrey Gilliano's face is enough to make anyone a recluse. My husband once made the remark, "That guy knows more about my life than I do." Mr. Gilliano missed the joke and used it to endorse his book. To rate himself as the world's greatest rock and roll biographer, brackets, a laughable title in the first place, close brackets, is nothing but delusion. He has only ever been in the vicinity of my husband for about 10 minutes and considers himself an expert. He parades as a spiritual person while condemning the famous, yet without them, his achievements in this life wouldn't rate one line in any newspaper. To judge Paul McCartney as vacuous and shallow, after all Paul has written and offered to the world, is surely the judgment of an arrogant mind, especially as Gilliano's own recognition is not because he is creative, but because, like a starving dog, he scavenges from his heroes, picking up bits of gristle and sinew along the way, repackaging them for consumption by a gullible public. His life is a curse to himself, and perhaps his admitted 300 acid trips by the age of 19 have something to do with it. I'm sick of this guy. Signed Olivia Harrison, brackets Mrs. George, Henley-on-Thames, 1992. I love that brilliant riposte from Olivia. She's spot on. Jeffrey Giuliano has no business launching into character assassinations of four people who he's hardly ever met. And all he's done is heard their records. So I think most of us fans need to aspire to the lyrics of a George song from the answers at the end. We don't always live up to it, but scan not a friend with a microscopic glass. You know his faults, now let his foibles pass. I think that's what we should all be aiming for. Because in the end, to paraphrase the Beatles' last line on Abbey Road, and in the end, the music and the magic the Beatles gave us far outweighs any negative stuff you care to mention. Thanks for watching. See you next time.